This is The Final Straw Radio mini episode, and we just had a conversation with Assata, an activist and member of Yellowhammer Alternative, an Alabama-based far-left autonomous mutual aid group. Hey there, can you introduce yourself, where you're from, and if you work with any groups you affiliate with that you want to name?
My name is Assata, and I'm from Mobile, Alabama, and I run the Yellowhammer Alternative.
And what can you tell us about autonomous relief efforts around Hurricane Harvey in the southern so-called U.S.?
I originally connected because through Yellowhammer, I run Food Not Bombs with my partner here in Mobile. And so we connected with Houston's Food Not Bombs. And through that, we found several other organizations that were trying to do grassroots work there. And so there were 4 groups that we worked with directly. And we were there for about almost a week on ground. We did several things. We did Food Not Bomb servings every day, sometimes multiple times throughout the day. Our main focus was for POC communities that weren't receiving like the aid that they necessarily needed. And so that was where our focus was in terms of helping. So we did servings in those areas, which also turned into a lot of cop watch and ice watch because people were being detained. We did a lot of fundraising and stuff beforehand. So it was kind of a situation where people knew who we were. And so if there was an immediate need that they had, we were able to go out and actually do that and serve those people directly.
What kind of skills and resources have been showing up, and what sort of needs do you see still existing?
In terms of needs that we already had there, which I thought was really amazing because I hadn't had that type of experience on a larger scale like this, were people that were willing to help by any means necessary. So there were a lot of situations where we weren't allowed certain places to give aid, or certain people that weren't allowed to receive aid from like larger organizations and things like that. And we were fortunate enough with the group that we were with that we were willing to help them by any means necessary. So I think that was a great resource to have. And then also that there were so many different leftist type groups that were willing to work together so that we can have a larger pool in terms of pooling resources and people that were able to help. What I personally felt was lacking, and which I'm trying to work on now for future efforts, was we had a great amount of people that were actually on the ground in Houston and able to assist that way, but there were not a lot of people that weren't there that could do things like answering emails and mapping things and keeping things in order and like organizing on that end. So it was a lot of stuff that we would have to pull away from people on the ground so we could monitor things like that. And so I think that's something that we should definitely work on and like push for people to actually volunteer with us remotely.
How could someone who's interested in getting involved in that sort of thing get involved? Where can they find out more about where to plug in?
Well, one of my main focuses with running Yellowhammer Alternative is to connect people with different organizations that are in need. And so specifically, like we're working on like relief for Irma right now. And so like we've started a Facebook group through our page where like we're posting stuff at least several times an hour all day about different organizations that need specific help.
And where can people find that information?
The name of the organization is the Yellowhammer Alternative. And so that's our name on Facebook and the URL as well. And it's one of the pinned posts on the page that has a link directly to our Facebook group.
So as we're speaking, Hurricane Irma has been ripping through the Caribbean, upsetting human communities in the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, Puerto Rico, and elsewhere in the sea, and is heading towards the eastern Gulf states. Can you talk a bit about the emergency response work you hear gearing up for the storm system and possibly for Hurricane Jose in Irma's wake?
Specifically with Irma, one thing I will admit to that I'm really trying to get better about is that we have not started prepping for Jose like at all. And so I'm actually kind of nervous about that. But in terms of Irma, we actually started doing prep for it on Monday of this week, just because like one important thing that I learned in Houston from a lot of people that we were helping actually had a family. The grandmother ended up telling us about how there was no way to be too prepared for storms like this. And so we wanted to go ahead and start as early as possible in terms of gathering funds and gathering resources and people and stuff that could help with that. So we started that on Monday. Like I said, we set up the Facebook group and we started reaching out to other autonomous groups like in all throughout Florida that are willing to work with us and help us. And like we've set up the fundraising page for it. And so we've been circulating that. Our main focus today was on media. And so we've been reaching out to different media outlets to let them know that we exist and that this is an option for people to be able to aid directly to the people that actually need the help instead of going through larger organizations that actually aren't helping the people that are most at risk.
Yeah, it seems like a critique in the past of those larger organizations is that they don't have the networking on the ground and the trust of the communities, and also that there's a high administrative cost to their functioning. Is that something
Mm-hmm.
that you've heard people in your region, especially that's been hit so hard by hurricanes over the years, experiencing or expressing?
Definitely. I mean, even from me, like my personal experience, because like we lost everything in Katrina. So like my area was hit very hard with that. And we learned that like a lot of the major organizations, as Red Cross and like things like that, like they weren't specifically helping the people in the community. A lot of it is the administration costs. And then a lot of it is that they're so out of touch with the actual areas that they don't know what people need and what areas are most affected. Because even with Houston, while we were there were a lot of areas and stuff like outside of Houston that we were able to work with and help where the people hadn't received any aid at all because like Red Cross and places like that didn't even come to those areas. And it was generally very, very poor POC like communities and stuff that weren't receiving any aid, which is also mind-boggling to me with the billions of dollars that they're being donated that they don't have the resources to reach out to those areas.
Can you talk about what mutual aid organizing as opposed to charity looks like in these sort of circumstances? Like, how does that on the ground reaching out and into and with the communities that are affected frequently because of the intersection of poverty and systemic racism in the United States primarily are populations of color that are poor?
Well, I think there's several things. Like, for one thing, too, like we particularly worked with a lot of indigenous communities that were undocumented. And so these people, because there were major corporations, they were afraid if it was even an option for them to reach out to them, like if they were to reach out and get help and aid like that, because particularly at the shelters, like they're checking IDs, which a lot of these people don't have. So it's the concept of like, you want to receive help, like you need to prove that like you're documented. And if you're not, then like you're going to be detained and like different things like that. So I think that's where one thing I really stress with our organizing for Irma is that we can't depend on the state, that it's kind of, we're at a point where like it's up to us as a community to reach out and help these people because like I said, the fear that a lot of them aren't able to reach out because of that fear. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, with a lot of these major organizations, like they're not based in these areas. They don't have any people in these areas, so they have no idea what the actual need is. And so that's what I think is really great about a lot of these autonomous organizations deciding to come together and provide like direct action and direct aid and things like that themselves.
Yeah, and since you're mentioning undocumented communities in particular and their relationship with law enforcement or the fear that they might get taken into ICE detention, there was a leaked memo or leaked information basically that came out just a few days ago about so-called Operation Mega and that the Trump administration was going to order ICE to do sweeps around the country, targeting, I would imagine, I think it said 8,000 people, but of course there's huge amounts of people that are arrested, quote, incidentally to those. And ostensibly they've said that they're retracting that for now because it would be inappropriate to be timed at the same time as the hurricane. But it's incredible, and it really seems to bring to light the position of government as being the enemy of community.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally don't, because we had a meeting tonight about that, because I personally don't believe, and a lot of people that I'm working with, that is something that's on hold. And so that's our biggest fear right now, is that people having to worry about their lives in terms of like the hurricane and like losing everything. And also on top of that, having to worry about them being detained and taken away and things like that. So we're currently, that's kind of been the shift in like what our main focus is going to be right now is particularly protecting those undocumented communities.
Harvey has presented the highest rainfall record in the U.S. with roughly 50 inches in some areas of Texas. Irma has measured as one of the strongest cyclones to hit landfall in terms of wind speed, tying with the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. Something like 300 miles per hour. I don't know how fast it is in knots, but something incredible, 185 or something. So I assume that you aren't a climate scientist, but I wonder if you can say anything about the need for this sort of community response in the age of increased chaos produced by anthropogenic climate change.
I know like with Harvey and then like with Irma coming right afterwards, there was all these like news reports on like major publications about how like this is a once in every 500 years type storm. Like this isn't like a normal thing or whatever. And I think that language and that rhetoric needs to change, because when you have a once in 500-year storm, like we have two of them happening in a matter of like a week, like it's important that we start recognizing and acknowledging the fact that climate change is very real. And then when you have situations specifically like with hurricanes that like, I mean, like I said, like I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't like understand, like know a lot of it, but just basic science of that warmer weathers produce more intense storms in terms of like hurricanes. And generally there's no really denying that the oceans and stuff are getting warmer. So like we at least have like that acknowledgement. And so I think with stuff like that, or like which I'm kind of hoping like with these storms and stuff happening, that ends up changing that conversation where people are recognizing how real climate change is and that what we are actually doing as people to contribute to that. And so that's the other part of like what we're working on and stuff, like the prep and stuff for Irma, and then now even like in the wake of like Harvey, is putting out more information about that so people can have an understanding of what exactly is going on and like how we can essentially try to stop this or slow it down as much as possible.
Well, Assata, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for taking the time to talk to me.
No problem.
More from our radio can be found at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. More about Assata's group can be found at theyellowhammeralternative.com, and you can make donations to theirs and others' efforts in the Gulf at youcaring.com/theyellowhammeralternative. I hope y'all enjoyed this mini episode.